Hello again, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed these season previews, this college football preview series that we've featured on YouTube, KHOU 11 Plus, Roku, Fire TV. Wherever you find us, we've been there with these college previews, talking to the best minds that the sport has to offer in the state. But this final installment in the series, well, it's a general overview of the college football landscape nationwide. We've talked to U of H, Texas A&M, Texas, Baylor, and now what about the news and topics that everyone else is talking about? Conference predictions, playoff predictions? Well, who better to talk to than Chris Gordy of the Locked On SEC podcast? Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC podcast. Always nice to talk college football with you. So, first full slate of games this week. What are you most looking forward to this college football season? Let's start there.
Yeah, I think the biggest part is the depth of quarterbacks that we have around college football this year. I think this is one of the best crops that we've had in a while. You know, we just went through an NFL draft that we saw, Kenny Pickett was the only first-round pick. And a lot of these big quarterbacks that people were hyping up, like Malik Willis and all these guys, they fell to the third round and further. I think this year is going to be very different. I think we're going to be NFL teams are going to have a lot of eyes on a lot of these quarterbacks this year. And it starts with Bryce Young, the reigning Heisman Trophy winner at Alabama, C.J. Stroud at Ohio State. Both those guys kind of expected to be top five, if not, number one and number two in the draft next year. And so I think those guys, and then some of these other guys that can really improve their stock, particularly around the SEC. You have Hendon Hooker at Tennessee, Will Levis at Kentucky. There's a lot of guys around there that had good years last year that people are expecting them to build off of that. And so I know it's a little bit of a mix of, you don't have to be a good college quarterback to be a good pro, but a lot of NFL scouts are keeping an eye on that. And that's what's going to make the college game so good this year is that we've got so many good, talented quarterbacks all over the place. And the transfer portal has been a mess. I mean, you've got guys literally, the former USC quarterback, Jackson Dart, is at Ole Miss. Another one, Keaton Slovis, is now at Pitt. So we're seeing a lot of jumbling of guys all over the college football world.
Casey Thompson going to Nebraska. He's going to be playing he's going to be playing for the Huskers this season. So yeah, you're right. It's pretty crazy, and it's not just quarterbacks transfer. I mean, it's like the Wild West in college football. We're also seeing conference realignment again. That whole. So before we get into the season, I do want to touch on conference realignment. It seems like we're getting closer and closer to, if not a big three, but a big two here between the Big Ten and the SEC. They're probably not even going to be called that at some point. Who knows? But as a Big Ten guy, I don't like it. I'm more of a traditionalist. But what is your take on this whole changing landscape as we get into college realignment again?
Yeah, it's like a lot of folks in the business I've talked to, they said they're not fans of it, but it just kind of is what it is at this point. It's where we are in college football. It's all about the money when it comes to the TV dollars, and that's what the conferences are looking at. Geography has nothing to do with it anymore. I still say geography should have to make some sense. I mean, the fact that you may have Rutgers going from Jersey out to play USC and UCLA in Los Angeles the next couple of years just doesn't make a hell of sense. Maybe a football, you can make it, say, all right, it's one trip, it's fine. But think of all the other sports, basketball, baseball, volleyball, all these other sports where it just does not make any sense for, those sports that don't generate the kind of revenue that football does. This is all for football, and TV dollars is all this is about. And look, the dominoes have already started falling. We know that Texas and Oklahoma are coming to the to the SEC. It's going to be earliest 2025, or latest 2025, but it may be earlier than that. But the dominoes already started to fall with the Big 12 announcing next summer U of H is coming, and BYU and the schools at Cincinnati and UCF. They're already coming over to the Big 12 next summer. So now I think that's turned up the heat on conferences to say, man, we're all left scrambling. Some teams in the ACC are going, where are we going to go? Are we staying put here? Are we going to add, or are we going to subtract? And we're all jumping ship. The Pac-12's in that same boat right now. They've lost USC, they've lost UCLA, and the Big 12, there's been rumors already that they're eyeing westward, and they're thinking about going after maybe the Arizona schools or Oregon or something like that. So we're not done.
Utah?
Yeah, Utah as well. So we're not done yet, Daniel. We've only just begun in the conference expansion. The only thing that I'm scared of is, do we really want to get to 2 30-team, power conferences? Like, what are we doing at that point? I think if we're going to call them conferences still, then they should still be conferences. I would cap it at the most I would go is 20. But the whole idea of a conference is still being able to play the teams within the conference. If you have 30 teams, you're not a conference. When are you ever going to play those teams in football? Hey, we'll play you guys this year. We'll see you in about 8 years, when the schedule comes back around. In that sense, it makes no sense. So that's where I think, I like what the SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey said a few weeks ago. We're kind of fine at 16. We'll add Texas and Oklahoma, and we'll stand pat for a while. We're in no rush to make any additions, but I think the Big 12, the ACC, and whatever happens with the Pac-12, they're going to be scrambling going, no, we need to add as many teams as we can.
As an SEC guy, it's always fun to talk about, right? I know they're going to probably stay pat, but what is a logical get next for the SEC? I mean, we're talking geography. I think for the SEC, they're kind of positioned maybe a little bit better than the Big Ten is, because the Big Ten is just running out of options at this point when you're trying to add major schools, major names, major institutions with big money. You have to go west, but the SEC still has some options down there in the Southeast. Where do you think they could even go next to just have some fun with this topic?
Yeah, I was told by a couple of different people in the business that if you're going to expand, what you're looking to do is add eyeballs. And in adding eyeballs, you want to add states that you're not currently in. So, for instance, for the SEC and their landscape, North Carolina would make a lot of sense because you already have South Carolina and the Gamecocks. Somebody said Clemson wouldn't make much sense because you already have eyeballs in the state of South Carolina. You go get the UNC Tar Heels, you're bringing in another state with eyeballs to the conference. But I've also been told that if the brand's big enough, it doesn't matter if they're already in the same state. And one of those, the easy one to add, is Florida State. If you've ever been to a game at LSU and LSU's going to play in Florida and you road trip it to Gainesville, Florida, guess where you're driving through? Tallahassee along I-10. You're stopping up. You're literally driving through where Florida State is. They're right there in the geographical footprint. So to me, Florida State would make the most sense. They've got the tradition. They've got all those things that go with great rivalries. They already play Florida every year as a non-conference rivalry. Now you would just add them to the conference, and some other schools that already do that. Like we said, Clemson plays South Carolina every year. You could add them. Louisville plays Kentucky every year. They're in the footprint. You could add them. So depending on what they value, is it adding other states and new eyeballs, or is it just adding big brands? Like I said, I think Clemson and Florida State would be right there at the top of that list if that's where they wanted to go.
Okay, so let's talk about the season at hand now. Let's get to matters that do matter as of right now. The SEC, that's your bread and butter. Let's start there, right? So big game early on is Texas hosting Alabama. That's the one that everybody's circled. Probably more important for Texas than it is Alabama. I think Alabama should probably roll in that. How do you see the conference early on as they kind of work their way through the non-conference before they get to the actual nitty-gritty within the SEC?
Yeah, Alabama's a perennial favorite, and everybody's picking them to run the table and go undefeated once again. And the numbers speak for themselves. On years where Saban got disappointed and didn't win the title, man, those teams the next year come back with a furious vengeance, and they start to take names and run roughshod. So, look, it's easy to pick Alabama to run the table, win the national championship, but they've got problems. They lost two big-time receivers in John Mechie, who's a Houston Texan now, Jameson Williams. They got to find production there. They've been retooling the offensive line. They brought in a guy named Tyler Steen from Vanderbilt as a transfer to be a starting left tackle. Look, Alabama should never be starting a transfer from Vanderbilt. That's just the reality of the situation. So they've got their warts, they've got their issues, but you're right. Texas, I think they're just not ready for prime time yet. I think Sark is trying to turn this thing around. Obviously, last year felt like a hiccup in the road, but he's recruiting great. He's got Arch Manning and company coming, but that week 2 game, I just think it's going to be too much. Alabama's going to roll roughshod. But here's where I go on the SEC this year, Daniel. Georgia's got to defend their national title, right? They lose all these pieces. They're rebuilding the defense. Are you a rebuild or are you a retool? Because Alabama, they just reset. They reload. They don't rebuild. So what does Georgia do there? And my question is, what happens if Bama trips up along the way and has a loss, and Georgia trips up and has a loss, and they both meet in Atlanta for the SEC title game? I think that's a scenario where the winner of that game is in the playoff, the loser is out. And so many people are just automatically penciling Georgia and Alabama into their 14 playoff. And I'm going, guys, if one of those teams has a loss, they're not going to put a 2-loss SEC championship loser into the playoff game. But I will say one other wrinkle in this. Alabama and A&M, they're dead set for that rematch with Jimbo and Saban. And look, there's some bad blood there, but that game's in Tuscaloosa. It's going to be brutally tough for the Aggies to win that one. That said, if the Aggies can run the table the rest of the way, they get a huge non-conference game against Miami early in the season at home in Kyle Field. If they can win that one and win the rest of their SEC games, A&M could do what Alabama's done a couple times. Not play for the SEC title game in Atlanta, but be sitting there as a sexy one-loss team that, hey, maybe they get in as an at-large into the playoff.
Well, they did get screwed. Well, if you talk to Aggies, they did get screwed already under Jimbo Fisher. So maybe that's their path to the playoff. What's a sleeper team in the SEC, you think?
Yeah, there's a couple in the West. I think Arkansas is one that's very sneaky. Sam Pittman's gotten that team better every year. They have the quarterback situation figured out. KJ Jefferson's a savvy vet that, man, when you need a game-winning field goal or touchdown, he puts the team on his back and he goes down the field and does it. They get Alabama in Fayetteville this year, so that's one that maybe if they can win that one, Arkansas could be that sneaky team in the driver's seat in the West. And then the East, the two big ones are Kentucky and Tennessee. Again, Will Levis at Kentucky, the quarterback. A lot of people saying maybe he makes that Joe Burrow-like rise his senior year at Kentucky. Maybe he does that and takes the Wildcats to an SEC title game. And then Hendon Hooker at Tennessee last year. All he did was throw for 30-plus touchdowns, only a couple interceptions. He ran the Josh Heupel offense to a T. A lot of people think the Vols can take that next step. Got some questions on defense, but don't be surprised if Tennessee pulls off an upset on Georgia this year or Kentucky. Man, that team will be in the driver's seat for the East.
All right, let's switch gears then. Let's go over a little closer to home here in Houston, the Big 12. Actually, you know what? Before we get to that, let me ask you about LSU. I know that's a program that you care about a lot. LSU with Brian Kelly. What do you expect out of Brian Kelly this first year?
Look, most people I've talked to have said they take an 8-4, 7-5 type season. LSU's got to build from a lot of problems that were left over from the Ed Ogeron era, where we saw them in the bowl game here in Houston, where they struggled. They had like 20 guys, scholarship guys available for that game. A little bit different. They've hit up the transfer portal very well. He's recruited very well, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time. But the thing with Brian Kelly is, man, that guy's been a winner everywhere he's been. We act like winning 10 games at Notre Dame is easy. It's not easy with all the recruiting restrictions, and you got to bring in guys that have 4.0 GPAs and all that to South Bend. And by the way, there's no recruiting pipeline in Indiana. He had to go all over the country to get recruits. At LSU, Louisiana recruits itself. It brings in some big 4-star, 5-star talent every single year. So if he can just put up that proverbial fence around Louisiana, I think within 3 to 4 years, Brian Kelly's going to win a national championship at LSU. Why? Because the last three guys all did it. Nick Saban, Les Miles, and Ed Ogeron. So if those guys can do it, particularly and Les Miles, I think Brian Kelly certainly can. And he's the winningest coach in the history of Notre Dame as well. So I would say give him a little bit of time. But, a 7 or 8 win season this year for LSU, I think would be starting him off on the right path.
Well, it's always key with these coaches and these big programs, giving these guys time. And I cannot. Every time I see a big program, and you know where I'm going with this. Every time I see a big program that just moves on from coach to coach to coach, thinking they're going to figure it out in 2 years. I mean, that just doesn't work in college football. That just doesn't happen. And having said that, let's go to the Big 12 in Texas, which I think the Big 12 is actually kind of open. I mean, I don't think OU is going to be the favorite, the powerhouse that it's been over the last couple of years, depending on who you talk to, how it shakes out. Baylor can make another run at it. A dark horse I heard recently was Kansas State. Like, the Big 12 seems to be kind of a fun league because there's so many opportunities for teams to kind of make a run and a push.
Yeah, and Dave Aranda's done a great job at Baylor, and a lot of people are thinking that Baylor is going to start to build something here. And, maybe not the word dynasty, but a team that can really, take hold of that Big 12 and kind of run it the next couple of years. Oklahoma State, man, it just seems like Mike Gundy just falls into a 10-win season every year. They're always right there competing. But Texas is intriguing, man. I know a lot of people are counting them out because they went 5-7 last year. But when you go dig through the numbers and see 5 of those 7 losses were by 1 score or less, man, if they could just fix that from last year, you're talking about a double-digit win season. If Texas can fix those mistakes and go 10-2 this year, man, they'll be throwing them a parade at the end of the year. Oklahoma, I think we don't know what's going to happen. It's a new head coach in Brent Venables. It's a new quarterback in Dylan Gabriel coming over from UCF. So many question marks that we know what Oklahoma's been the last decade, and that's dominating the Big 12 and getting to the playoff every year. But what's this look like under new leadership? I think there's a transitional phase, and I don't think Brent Venables hits the ground running. Maybe an 8-win, 9-win type season does pretty good, but if I was banking my money, I would bank it on Baylor, and then a little bit of a long shot. If you can get some good odds, put it on Texas, because I think Sark is coming.
All right, so let's then move on to the Big Ten. It really seems like the Big Ten, and being a Big Ten guy myself, it's just Ohio State and the crew. I mean, I hate to say that. And, when Urban Meyer got there, he kind of separated that program into the next level with the way they play, the spread offenses, the speed on the outside. It's an SEC, more like an SEC type feel to that team in a conference which is slow and smash mouth football. Look, I get it. I understand what all the complaints are about the Big Ten, but does Ohio State have enough to compete in the playoff? I guess that's the big question when it comes to the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, if CJ Stroud is everything that everybody's hoping he will be, and Travion Henderson, their stud running back who had, 1,200 rushing yards last year, I think they've got the dynamic pieces. And the thought is, as good as those guys were last year as young guys, they're only going to get better as the years go by. And so I think Ohio State's got the best pieces. How good is their new defensive coordinator? That's going to be the big question on does that defense live up to what they've been basically just cranking out first round talent every year, whether it's defensive backs or defensive ends from Ohio State. But yeah, everybody's saying it's Ohio State's conference to lose. And then I think Michigan and Michigan State are right there as kind of teams that maybe have a chance if they run the table with one loss. Maybe they could get an at-large bid, or maybe they're playing for a New Year's Six bowl, like a Sugar Bowl or Rose Bowl, whatever it is. But the crazy part is with all this realignment and bringing teams in, I think the Big Ten really needs to take a look at itself, because that Western side, man, the fact that every year it's either Wisconsin or Iowa, it's just like, man, it really should be the two best teams. There should be years where it's Ohio State, Michigan, or Ohio State, Michigan State. Despite them playing both in the East, they should both play for the Big Ten title and kind of rework this thing. So, yeah, again, just to recap, it's going to be Ohio State. They're most likely going to run the table, and they're going to be in the playoff. But I still think that Michigan State and Michigan have a good chance to get through the season with one or two losses and maybe get to a New Year's Six bowl.
Well, Chris, I think the West is just fine. Thank you. Okay. I don't want anybody else in the West, because that's when I heard UCLA and USC. I'm like, no. But that's a selfish side of me talking about Northwestern, but that's for another day. Overall, throughout the country, we saw Cincinnati last year make a run at the playoff, and that was a great story. A lot of people may be saying U of H, if they get through those first two games at UTSA. I know it's UTSA. They had a good season last year. That's a program that's kind of emerged. And then at Texas Tech, then maybe they can run the table. Is there a program out there that you kind of looked at and you're like, well, this could be kind of a fun team to watch? And we talked about maybe Tennessee, Kentucky, but is there anything else out there that you think keep an eye on this team?
Yeah, there's one, and some people may not even think of them as a Pac-12 team yet, but Utah is a team that's starting off the season, preseason top 10. And man, week one, what better road test to go earn a nice road win than playing Florida in the swamp? It's already an ESPN Saturday night game, and everybody's getting hyped up for this one. But Cameron Rising, he's the quarterback for Utah, and a lot of people expecting him to take a big step from where he was last year. I saw him at the Manning Passing Academy a few weeks ago. The kid's very impressive. Everything you hear about him, he exhibits what you want in a leader of a football team. And so Utah, kind of that sneaky team that maybe some people still don't even realize they're in the Pac-12. But if they can run off a nice, let's say they win the Pac-12 and they beat Oregon, have a chance maybe to go undefeated or finish with one loss. I think Utah is that team that can sneak into the playoff that maybe a lot of people are predicting right now. When I see a lot of these predictions about the top four teams that make the playoff, nobody has Utah in there.
Okay, so let's jump off there. The final topic. What is your really early? I could probably guess one or two, but what does your college football playoff look like right now?
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody who's doing this realistically, I think it starts with plugging Alabama and Ohio State in there. It just, this thing's been pretty easy to figure out every year, because basically it's been like the same 8 teams that make the playoff every year, with the occasional Washington thrown in and Cincinnati last year. But I think it's Alabama. I think it's Ohio State. I think Clemson bounces back. It's so funny how we look at Clemson last year and go, man, they were terrible last year. They lost 3 games. In what world is losing 3 games a terrible season? At Clemson, they've set such a high standard for themselves.
It's a great bar. It's a great bar. That's what you want to be as a program, right? I mean, that people are complaining for 3 losses. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's a good place to be. Not a bad place to be. Let's put it that way.
Right. So I think Clemson bounces back. I think they're in there. So there's your 3. Who's your 4th? There's a scenario where Alabama and Georgia are both undefeated again, and the team that loses the SEC championship game, if it's close, that team gets into. So I've seen some people plugging Alabama and Georgia in there. Like I said, there's my scenario that A&M loses to Bama but runs the table the rest of the way. Maybe they get a chance to get in as an large bid, but I would think that you would probably default to conference champions. And again, Oklahoma's been the team to get the benefit of the doubt the last handful of years coming out of the Big 12, but let's go a little bit off the wall. Let's say Baylor runs the table on the Big 12. And let's plug Dave Aranda and the Baylor Bears in there. I think that'd be a lot of fun to say Alabama, Ohio State 1, 2, Clemson number 3. And how about Baylor sneaks in as the 4th team?
Well, how about that? I did not think you were going to go that route, but it'll be fun and see what they do in Waco. Chris Gordy, thank you. Locked On SEC podcast. Check them out if you haven't done so already. Good stuff. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate your knowledge. You can catch his podcast, a good one, by the way, one of the better college podcasts around. So, Chris Gordy, thanks so much. That's going to do it for our college preview series. Let's have a great season, some highly competitive games, and hopefully our Texas teams can surprise us. U of H looking for some big things. A&M too. They're all looking for big things in 2022. So hopefully we'll have a fun and productive season to talk about. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys on the flip side on air and on our digital platform.